Hello and welcome to a special edition of All Elite Morro. Well, here we are on the day Hulkamania passed away. Probably a man who's left quite possibly the biggest impact on the history of the industry, maybe second only to Vince McMahon. You know what? We've joked about this before, or what it'll be like on the day the Hulkster dies. Um, and you know, I seen the news earlier. I said I would prepare a special edition in memory of the Hulkster. I'm going to start with some reactions on our Instagram. Shane put out the call, thoughts and opinions on the Hulkster. R_N80s, I think I know who that is. A childhood hero who I'm sorry to say won't be missed. Complicated legacy. Cottle Crow, R.I.P. Hulk Hogan, not Terry Bollea. Will miss his hysterical made-up stories. We actually did a full episode on the Hulkster's lives. A full episode on the Hulkster's legacy and his lives not that long ago. And we're going to do another one. We're going to record tomorrow. Are we having internet issues? Looks like we are. See. Let me see if we can fix this. I don't know. Seems to be an issue there. Sure, look. I don't know why. Normally works fine at this time of day. Blank screen. Drop the frames. Turning Down Metallica is legendary. And the Rolling Stones. Metallica, the Rolling Stones. We will get into a little bit of his lies at some stage. That's Cottle Crow with the made up stories. Childhood hero, I'm sorry to say, won't be missed. R_N80. Jamie B was never a Hulkamaniac myself. Piper Mark, but no wrestler had a bigger impact than Hogan. So, never mind the performer, a human being died. It's crazy how heartless some people can be. David says a bit laggy. Are we still laggy, David? I'm getting dropped frames. Getting lots of dropped frames. Why is that happening? I don't know. To a human being has died. It has. And I think I was a history teacher for years. And it's very important to, in my opinion, encompass somebody's full legacy when it'd be disingenuous not to recognize that a large portion of wrestling fans will have complicated feelings regarding Hogan's death, and even a lot of people might be happy to that, particularly in certain ethnicities, which I'm not in a position to speak for them and their feelings. I am in a position to speak for myself. I also have quite a complicated view of Hogan. I think Hogan's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, but also potentially not a great human being as a person. Not a pretty awful human being, actually, in many respects. So yeah, like Hogan is the most brilliant yet complicated character that wrestling has ever produced. And I think let's go all the way back to the start, shall we? Hogan debuts in 1977 after being trained by Japanese wrestler Hiro Matsuda. and being discovered by the Briscoes. The Briscoes, what talent spotters they were! Unbelievable. Um, Unbelievable talent spotters when you think about it. And then he gets trained by Hiro Matsuda down in Florida. Matsuda was a Japanese wrestler but spent most of his career working in the US and trained many legendary wrestlers afterwards. People like Lex Luger, even the Great Muta trained with Matsuda for a while. Ted DiBiase trained with Matsuda. You could probably look up the list. They're the three that stand out to me. Like Great Muta, fantastic. DiBiase, unbelievable. And Hogan eventually finds his way working for Vince Sr. Um, but he gets the call to play Thunderlips in Rocky 3. And Vince Sr. doesn't want him going. So Vince fires him, lets him go. Hogan takes the gig, as he most definitely should have. Let's be honest, Vince Sr. was completely wrong there. And then Hogan afterwards makes his way to um, AWA, Vern Gagne's promotion, the north of America, central kind of region around Minnesota. Minnesota was its home base. My first big heel turn was Bully Ray's Aces and Eights, and Hogan was front and center of that. But apart from that, don't have much to say on him. Is David giving away his age? Um, Hogan, to me, I started watching wrestling in 1992. But in those early days, Bret was my favorite wrestler when I started watching. I thought he was just like so magnetic. And my first big exposure in Ireland to wrestling was on Sky. And 5, 6 years of age, and you get to build up SummerSlam '92, and then SummerSlam '92 itself. But obviously, you go back and rent videotapes. Shane spoke about this loads of times myself and Shane going down to the local video store, renting videotapes, and it was all Hogan. Everything was Hogan. Early '90s, it's all Hogan. And so he quickly became one of my favourites as a youngster. Um, getting a text from Shane. Serious lagging issues, he's saying. Let me see if I can. Maybe I have to do something here. Yeah, I know. One sec. Let's see. Are we back? Frames are back. I appear to be back. Uh, disconnect stuff in here the other day, and since I've done that, my shit keeps connecting to the wrong internet. I have one of those Wi-Fi extenders in my office, but sometimes it doesn't connect to the Wi-Fi extender. It connects to the wrong one. So, are we back? Concurrent viewers 8. We're nearly at a record, people. We got 8 concurrent. Good man, Hulk Hogan. Still the biggest draw after that. Shane, is that okay? No. This has been a shit show from the start. Seems better now. Yeah, I was connected to the wrong thing, so we're onto something here. Yeah, so trained by Hiro Matsuda, goes to Vince Senior. Doesn't really work out because he wants to go and do his Thunder Lips role in Rocky 3, which was absolutely the right choice. And then he goes to Vern Gagne in AWA. AWA, great promotion, great territory promotion. One of the territory promotions that kind of lasted the longest in its sticking with WWE. Obviously, not JCP or WCW or anything like that. But Hogan became a huge draw there. at a time when Nick Bockwinkel was the champ, and Vern Gagne was quite, what would you call it, traditionalist, and Vern never wanted to put the title on Hulk, despite the fact that Hulk was a huge draw. Um, and there was back and forth negotiations. This is a lot of this is covered in a brilliant book called "The Death of the Territories." I think that's the right name. I listened to the audiobook a couple of times now on Spotify. It's absolutely brilliant. And in order for Hogan to get the title, Vern wanted to change Hogan's merchandise revenue split, and Hogan obviously didn't want to change that because that's where he was making a huge amount of his money. Uh, and he got over huge, and he never put the title on him, despite the fact he gave him multiple title shots against Nick Bockwinkel. And Hogan was supposed to be a heel, but the fans in this area turned him babyface. And he was feuding with Nick Bockwinkel, and Vern would book all sorts of dusty finishes in order to get out of putting the title on Hogan and keeping the title on Bockwinkel. And Bockwinkel was getting pretty fucking old at this stage, you know. Um, so this is where Hogan laid the foundation for what would later become Hulkamania. Um, and we get to late '83, and the world of wrestling, particularly in the US, is shifting dramatically at this stage. Vince has taken over from his father. He's looking for his champion. At this stage, he's still running with Bob Backlund, who was much more of a stylistically fit with Vince Senior's image. And Vince Jr. had kept him as champion his first kind of couple of years, year and a half, almost 2 years after taking over the company from his father. But late '83, he makes a play for Hogan. Um, and Hogan had been a proven draw kind of throughout the Midwest at this stage. Like you're looking at, he was a big, massive draw in Minnesota. In numerous different buildings. He was a big draw in Chicago, which was a big media market, and then through other places like he was a draw in Wisconsin, Colorado, places like that. Even up into Canada and certain territories in Canada, he had become a draw there. Um, so Vince Jr. takes over, and he had a different vision than his father. Hogan fit his vision, this larger than life character. And even the title switch, how they got the title onto Hogan is super interesting. Bob Backlund didn't want to lose clean to Hogan because he saw Hogan as being um, not a real wrestler almost. Uh, and there's this thing, particularly well, not particularly in WWE, but throughout wrestling, but certainly in WWE as well, of the real champ had to have, or the world champ had to have an element of being legit, and Hogan didn't have that. Um, let's catch up on some personal life performance change. How do I feel about fans allowing the personal life performers change their opinions on them as performers? I see it all the time in football, now more recently in wrestling, Punk and Saudi. I think we should only judge them as performers. At the end of the day, we don't have a personal relationship with them. That's how I feel about Hogan, for example. I don't know, Terry. Uh, Shane says, sometimes I find it hard to enjoy art if I don't like the artist. Benoit, for example, I can't go back and watch stuff now. Yeah, I think Benoit is a great example there, Shaz. Uh, I think that's really a personal, like, I think you could ask a million people that question and probably get a million different answers. I would be similar to Shane in that I find art generally comes from a place of performer's personality anyway. And when that personality has some moral questions hanging over it, I find the art can be in a lot of ways disingenuous. And I do like to view wrestling as an art form. And there's no doubt that Hogan was a great artist, but also I find it hard as well. Like the Punk one is interesting to me as well because Punk has based his character on being a virtuous liberal and supporting liberal agenda, and he has cultivated an audience around him using that agenda. And I'm not saying he doesn't believe in those things. I think he genuinely does. And a lot of his fan base are loyal to him for that reason. And then with the Saudi thing, that seemed, that goes against what he built his character on. So I do think it's very hard to separate the performer. Like Tarantino's another complicated character, and you see like every art form has these complicated characters, and it can be hard to enjoy. But yeah, I don't know. I'm of the opinion that I don't know if Terry and Hulk are different people. I think maybe at one stage Terry and Hulk were different people, but slowly over the course of his life, Terry and Hulk met somewhere in the middle, or Hulk overtook Terry is probably the most likely one. Um, so yeah, I, I I think you can't in many cases separate the art from the artist, and I think when we see the reaction to Hogan's death online, particularly from the African American community, who would have been most affected by Hogan's different tirades and controversies against their people, it's very hard to blame them for having those feelings or to judge them for having those feelings. I think it's entirely valid that people have those feelings, and you may not like Hogan's work as a result of it. So yeah, now with the political stuff over, lost 4 viewers talking about the politics of Hulk Hogan. Stick to wrestling, dumbass. Um, but yeah, that's just who I am. I'm gonna talk that shit anyway. Um, so yeah, he comes into WWE. He debuts in January '84 on TV. Um, in Madison, and is instantly set up for a title match against the Iron Sheik, at Madison Square Garden in late January, 20 something of January 1984. And Hogan beats the Sheik. Um, and it's one of the first instances of Hogan hulking up. So, because the Sheik had injured Bob Backlund in their previous title match. The Sheik was a transitional champion. He beat Backlund late '83, drops the title in January '84 to Hogan, but he beat Backlund with the camel clutch and he'd injured Backlund's shoulder, and that was the story. But he also put the camel clutch on Hogan in the Madison Square Garden match. And what does the Hulkster do? The Hulkster hulks up. Crowd goes bananas. Hulkster drops the leg, pins the Sheik. The crowd goes wild. Gorilla Monsoon famously screaming, Hulkamania is here. And he was right. He was right. Hulkamania was here. And that is the start, really, of the national expansion of WWE. So Vince Jr. is quite often called the greatest promoter in the history of professional wrestling. And despite Vince's similar controversies surrounding his character, I think it's probably fair to say he is the greatest promoter in the history of pro wrestling because he done things that nobody else was able to do. Was he the greatest booker? In my opinion, absolutely not. But um, Jesus Christ, did anyone promote wrestling better than Vince? And Vince hitches his wagon to the back of Hulkamania. Um, and we get an unprecedented period of boom period in pro wrestling. WrestleMania 1 is built off the idea of the rock and wrestling connection with MTV. Hogan main events WrestleMania 1. He teams with Mr. T, a massive TV star at the time, and they defeat Piper and Orndorff. Sorry, Jamie, you Piper Mark. And that becomes like this iconic moment where wrestling just boomed out into the mainstream. It WrestleMania 1 was a tremendous success as a pay-per-view entity. And, obviously it got help from MTV and the connection there, Wendy Richter and all this. Mr. T being on the card was huge. But this just made Hogan an even bigger star. And it's probably fair to say that by the end of the 80s, was Hogan's a bigger star mainstream wise than Mr. T even. We go on to WrestleMania. WrestleMania 2 has problems, but they pretty much packed three arenas for WrestleMania 2. Hogan beats Bundy in the cage match there. We go on to WrestleMania 3 and he defeats Andre the Giant after slamming him. One of the most iconic wrestling matches in history, supposedly in front of 93,000. We know that's probably closer to about 78,000, but regardless, uh, what's the name of the dome? Is it the Silver Dome? Pontiac Silver Dome? Is that right? Is that WrestleMania 3? Uh, but like you're talking like one of the biggest crowds in the history of pro wrestling is going there to see Hogan versus Andre. And like from that, then we get the Mega Powers and that iconic storyline of the Mega Powers exploding. That was just so as a youngster, that was my favorite thing. Looking back on videotapes that I would rent. Yeah, WrestleMania 1, cool. The Hogan match or the Andre match, cool. But the whole Mega Powers thing, I would eat that up on tape. I loved Randy Savage as well. I loved Elizabeth. I loved everything about that. It's such a classic feud. Really one of the best put together pieces of long term storytelling that WWE ever did. Um, and it culminates in their WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 5, a great WrestleMania match. Um, so like you'll hear a lot about how Hogan wasn't a good wrestler. I totally disagree with that. I think Hogan was a fucking fantastic wrestler. Has there been a wrestler in the history of the business who was able to generate a crowd reaction quite like Hogan? Like if you go back in the next few days, and this wasn't just this short period of time. He generated insane reactions from the early 1980s until the early 2000s. 20 years of insane reactions consistently. Yeah, there was sometimes down periods, but he was able to do it time after time in different scenarios. And I think, like, the key of, I know you'll hear a lot of pro wrestlers talk about pe- people being spot monkeys and getting a reaction because they do a ridiculous spot or whatever. But the key in wrestling and the key to being a great worker is getting the crowd in the arena to react and to make them feel something. And there's probably nobody better in the history of wrestling than Hulk Hogan at getting the crowd in an arena to react. Just you go back and watch some of these pops, they're insane. I mean insane. Crowd going ballistic for him. And then, a lot of people, I'm sure I'd love to see a response in the chat here on this one. Uh, for growing up, hulking up will be used as a term forever. Yeah, hulking up. Like people use that who've never heard of Hulk Hogan. Um, I want to hear people's thoughts on WrestleMania 6. Like he lost clean to the Ultimate Warrior. Now I know he kicked out at like 3.1. Um, but that was a match for the ages where he puts over the Intercontinental Champion Ultimate Warrior, and that image of the two of them is like facing off is etched into my brain. Hogan with the or Warrior with the really cool orange Intercontinental title, and he beats Hogan, and this is really supposed to be the passing of the torch moment. Um, it's not Hogan's fault really that the Warrior's title reign kind of amounted to a damn squib, and later in the year, Warrior would lose the title to Sergeant Slaughter. And then Hogan would win it back in that the Los Angeles WrestleMania 7. Sergeant Slaughter turning heel and becoming almost a puppet of the Iraqi state during the Gulf War, uh, and Hogan beating him. And this is really where, Hulkamania had its first big decline. Um, because we go into WrestleMania 8, then, Hogan beats Slaughter for the title. There's all sorts of shenanigans later in the year. 92 Royal Rumble happens. Flair wins the title in the Royal Rumble match, going coast to coast, bell to bell. Uh, and Hogan really feels like he had a heel turn in that 92 Royal Rumble when he helped Ric Flair eliminate Sid. And WrestleMania 8 would become a double main event. We get that great match with Flair and Randy Savage, really underrated match, which, should have been the main event. And it was billed as a double main event, but Hogan and Sid was the main event because it was Hulk Hogan. And 92, and it really seemed at this stage the shine had kind of gone off Hogan. But then, you know, shit really hits the fan with the steroid trial. Um, and, Hogan returns at WrestleMania 9, or just before WrestleMania 9, noticeably deflated, and really cuts the legs out from underneath Bret Hart. And I think fans are starting to smarten up to the political machinations of Terry Bollea at this stage. He comes out at the end of that show, helps Bret, and helps Bret. Bret gets beaten by Yokozuna and cheat. Hogan comes out and wins the title back from Yokozuna. Yokozuna lasts about 7 minutes as champion. Disaster. And then, a lot of the steroid shit really hits the fan. He's on that, what was the name of that? Anicio Hall show, where, anyway, I can't pronounce the fucking name. But Hogan comes across as a guy who, he's denying the steroids thing, but we really know that that Hogan was on the juice for his whole run. Uh, you know, and he disappears for a year after losing to or losing to Yokozuna at Royal Rumble, and then he shows up in a car with Jimmy Hart, and he has signed with WCW, and like me as a kid was like, what is this? How do I watch Hulk Hogan in WCW? He's down in Florida. He lives down there. WCW is based out of there. At the time, even though Atlanta is probably their spiritual home. He's based out of there at the time. He joins WCW, and really, he does a great buy rate actually, a pay-per-view buy rate with Flair in '94. In WrestleMania 8 really should have been a Hulk and Flair main event, and the fact that it wasn't probably helped WCW in '94. But then we get, the typical Hulk Hogan thing of politicking and bringing in all his old friends. And we would see this happen now from here again and again and again. And WCW becomes a parade of ex WWE 1980s WWE guys between 1994 and 1996. Well, the ex WWE thing goes on a lot longer than that. But we get just this tired retread of monster of the month for Hulk Hogan to go up against. And it's not really moving any business. It's not doing anything of consequence. And it's really at this stage not challenging WWE, even though WWE is in a horrific down period as well. Pro wrestling itself is in a down period in these years, 94, 95. And then we get into 96, and 96 is super interesting. Jamie B says, whilst it's hard to separate the art from the artist and he's a controversial figure, Hogan versus Rocket Mania 18 is one of the greatest matches ever. Also, Hogan versus HBK, but for other reasons. I love that HBK match so much. Me and Shane and Dumph and Johnny the Beast Martis were talking the other day about our most watched matches. What matches have we watched the most in wrestling? Um, and I never mentioned that one, but it might actually be, and not for all the right reasons. That is SummerSlam 02, 3? No, 03. HBK versus Hulk Hogan. Just fucking hilarious. And we'll get to the Rock match. Um, so we get up to, I suppose, the midpoint of 1996. We get to July. We have what was built almost as an invasion. Kevin Nash, Scott Hall coming over and showing up. And first it's Scott Hall on his own, and then Nash shows up with him a few weeks later, which I always thought was kind of underwhelming the way they brought Nash in. And they're teasing the third man, the third man. And we get to Bash at the Beach 96, and it turns out that the third man is Hogan, and he turns heel and he joins the NWO. And the funny thing about this is actually Bash at the Beach didn't do great numbers either as a pay-per-view or a live attendance. Like if you compare that to Halloween Havoc the previous year, or the Bash at the Beach 94, 2 years earlier when Hogan beat Flair for the WCW title, the pay-per-view, there was 14,000 in attendance roughly for the Flair match, and it did a huge pay-per-view buy rate. The Halloween Havoc one did the Halloween Havoc 95 against the Giant, and when the Giant defeats Hogan by DQ, doesn't win the title. Um, did 13,000 live attendance and a slightly lesser buy rate. Whereas Bash at the Beach 96, when the turn happens, only did about 8,000 in attendance and not a big buy rate. Like a very low buy rate, like 40% or something less than what Flair Hogan did, and 30% less than what the Giant and Hogan did. However, it's after this where things start booming and we really get into the nuts and bolts of the NWO storyline. And this, like the NWO stuff, if you weren't around at that time period, it was incredible. Like truly incredible stuff. It was like nothing we'd ever seen as a wrestling fan before. And we spoke earlier about Hogan joined WWF creating this huge boom period and national expansion. We get in wrestling's second great boom period of my lifetime. And that's the NWO are probably singularly responsible for creating that. And not just the NWO. Hogan joining the NWO was the catalyst for it. If they had put another third man in there, it wouldn't have had anywhere near the same impact. And he drops the red and yellow and he dons the black and white and he takes the Hollywood moniker, and it becomes one of the greatest runs in wrestling history in terms of business, in terms of excitement. JT says Hogan Rock is still one of the greatest goosebump moments in history. It's insane. Crazy how history turns out. I remember they wanted Sting to be the third guy. Lucky for wrestling history, it was Hogan. Yeah, like, I love Sting. I prefer Sting to Hulk Hogan. But Hogan was like categorically, undeniably the only person who could have been and should have been the third man uh, for the NWO, and it never would have taken off. It would have been a fine mid-90s faction, and I'm sure it would have been interesting. I'm sure it would have done some good business, but it created like an absolute monster, like a runaway train. It was so big. There's nights during the Monday Night Wars throughout 97, 98, 99, mostly 98, 99, where there was 10 million people watching wrestling on Monday night in America. 10 million. And that started with Hogan being the third man at Bash the Beach 96. That moment, like his first promo was really funny. Go back and watch it. It feels like he doesn't know what to do. Like, see, obviously he hadn't been a heel since 81 or 82, and he'd been this like very particular character for a very long period of time. And then he's trying to be a heel, and he's in there with like Hall and Nash were cool as shit back then. Yeah, and it changed Sting's legacy. We got Crow Sting out, which is, I think we probably all agree, the most iconic version of Sting as well. It's the version of Sting that he went back to for his final run. I know he kept it for most time. I know he had variations of it during the TNA days, but it was the version that he used. Like it's the most iconic version of Sting and the best version of Sting, in my opinion. And that was born out of being the anti NWO guy. I know they fucked that up and all, but that's where the crow came from, hanging in the rafters, being the protagonist or probably the antagonist to the NWO. And we get that iconic title change on against Lex Luger, um, which if you go back and watch that, Luger beats Hollywood Hogan. Stick it into YouTube, you will find clips of it. The pop when Luger beats Hogan is literally off the charts. Now later Luger drops the title back, Hogan goes on a big run again, and the whole idea is that we're building to Starrcade '97, WCW's biggest pay-per-view of the year, and up to this point, what would turn out to be, and in fact, probably all-time WCW's biggest pay-per-view ever. They put around 17,500 people in the arena that night. They did a monster pay-per-view buy rate, and the idea was that on this night, after a year and a half of NWO running roughshod over WCW, Sting would defeat Hogan for the title. They had just signed Bret Hart. This company was on the verge. We were gone past the verge. Like, this is a moment where it really felt like, I don't know if it's highlighted enough as an important moment in the war. But if they'd nailed this, it was almost no looking back. WWE were firmly in the rearview mirror, but they fucked it. Hogan politics again. Says he doesn't want to lose to Sting. Sting isn't fit. He's not in good shape. This is the biggest moment of his career. He comes up, has shown up overweight. You know, Sting had been injured and he hadn't been working matches. But the idea was that they were going to do a kind of a fast count, and Hogan would get the pin in a fast count. And then the match would be restarted, and Brett would come out and say, "What the hell is this fast count shit about?" And, Brett had just been screwed the month before, or yeah, about a month before, maybe 6, 8 weeks before in WWE, and he was going to come out and say, "This is bullshit, not here as well, blah blah blah." And the match would restart, and Sting would beat Hogan. What ends up happening is the ref doesn't fast count, and they go ahead with the angle anyway. So Hogan pins Sting 1, 2, 3, looks like a perfectly normal count. Bret Hart comes out, argues, the match restarts, Sting wins. Kind of, it's like, how does Sting win this? I just saw him lose, legit lose. And Hogan had politic that situation. There's talk that Hogan had told the ref, was it Charles Robinson? I can't remember. Uh, had got to him beforehand and, said, "Hey, brother, do a legit count or whatever." But even after that, we go into '98, like, and we get, Hogan, as he always does, wins his title back. And like one of the best moments of wrestling in 1998 is in Nitro in the Georgia Dome in front of 40,000 people and they did a 1 week build on this when Goldberg beats Hulk Hogan in what's actually a really exciting match. Hogan beats Goldberg for the title, or sorry, Goldberg beats Hogan for the title in front of 40,000. Now I know they gave out a lot of free tickets, whatever, it doesn't matter. Crowd was hot as shit. Hot as shit. And go back and watch that. That's all over YouTube as well. Controversy said, but Hogan got done wrong for the rest stuff. So private recording and he was caught. Has everyone not uttered something wrong behind closed doors? I'm sure most people have. However, Ricky, how it came to light is one thing. And it's not the only time. There was another time he was caught saying similar stuff to his son on a recording as well. Um, it's to me the biggest issue is how he handled it afterwards. When he was given the opportunity to make amends and apologize, his message was be careful of cameras. That came out of WWE locker room in 2018 when they brought Hogan back to go to Saudi. Um, and he was given an opportunity to apologize to the locker room, and his message, it wasn't an apology, it was basically don't get caught. And I think, that is a major issue. People, but many famous characters and non-famous characters do really stupid shit, and I think it's not controversial. That's just stupid. Many people do ridiculously stupid shit, but make amends for it afterwards. And I think there is such thing as redemption. But Hogan didn't take this opportunity for redemption. In many ways, he doubled down, particularly with the Trump stuff afterwards. Particularly, he's been seen with far right figures taking photographs at certain, I don't want to say rallies, but events down in Florida and stuff. So I think the issue more so, Ricky, is the doubling down on those things. If he had come along and like tried to make amends for what he had said and tried to reach out to the affected community, maybe it would be different. Um, but he didn't. He doubled down. And that's where, in my opinion, you kind of shows the real character of the person. Yeah, if he'd showed remorse and not made excuses, 100% JT. That like that's exactly it. If he had like showed contrition and made attempts to right his wrongs, then we'd actually probably be here today talking about how the Hulk Hogan redemption arc and how great it was that he was able to redeem himself before he died, but that never happened. Um, and then me and Dumph on our old podcast scheduled for two falls. Um, we did a thing on Rodman, Hogan and Rodman, Dennis Rodman's run in wrestling. And at Bash the Beach '98, there was a tag match, Hogan and Rodman versus DDP and Karl Malone. Uh, that did bumper numbers as well. And that was actually a fucking really good match. And like you think, like, Hogan's supposed to be a shit wrestler. DDP is started late and he wasn't the most experienced wrestler in the world. Then you get Rodman and Karl Malone, the postman. Um, and it actually turned out to be a really good match. A very enjoyable match, I'd say. Anyway. Uh, And I think that was kind of a great thing for Hogan as well in terms of his legacy, and it did a huge pay-per-view rating. But then, how can any of us forget Halloween Havoc '98? They tried to run back the Hogan and Warrior storyline, and not only was it the worst storyline I've ever seen, it was also the biggest piece of shit of a match I've ever seen as well. It was so crap. Hogan Warrior Halloween Havoc '98. The storyline build was atrocious. Hogan was seeing Warrior in the mirror and all this nonsense, but the match itself is an all-time stinker of a match. Like there's nobody else like Hogan who could have a WrestleMania 18 level match with The Rock, and then have Halloween Havoc '98 level match with the Warrior. Like the difference in quality and everything between those two matches cannot be overstated. Tessa Blanchard is coming through some of the same thing right now, and JT, that's another person who went down the excuse route instead of trying to like have genuine contrition and making amends. Um, and things kind of a lot of WWE takes over the war in '99, and there's no doubt about that. Shit starts to go sideways fast. You end up with Hogan and Nash doing the finger poke of doom, and then you get the Vince Russo Hogan stuff where Hogan lays down for Jeff Jarrett or Jarrett lays down for Hogan and all this nonsense, and then there's lawsuits involved, and Hogan's suing Vince Russo for defamation of character that gets dropped later on, and Hogan, the 2000 run was just a complete shit show. And there is some cool stuff there with Billy Kidman, and he tried to put Billy Kidman over in the most Hulk Hogan way ever, where he puts him over without putting him over, because that's just his way. Um, and then he's one of these guys that when Vince buys WCW and the invasion is happening, And really, this is something that could have led to the third great wrestling boom uh, of my lifetime, we'll say. Um, the invasion. But Hogan, Hall, Nash, Goldberg all set out the invasion because they're under contract to, I believe it's to Warner Brothers Discovery, um, or to Turner, and not like actually WCW. Really weird contract situation. And they don't show up in the invasion, but they show up afterwards. And they show up as the NWO. Vince injects a lethal dose of poison into WWE. And really, this storyline went off the rocks very quickly. I think Scott Hall was suffering from some of his substance abuse issues at the time. Nash was a shadow of his former self. And, you know, Hogan was the only one to kind of get any juice out of it. And what we end up getting is Hogan Rock in the Icon versus Icon match in Toronto at WrestleMania 18 2002, shortly after he arrives. And I don't know if they had any long term plans. I'm sure they did. They wanted to get one more run with the iconic Hulkamania. Um, but it was forced that night. There was no turning back. That crowd, the crowd knew, the smart marks knew that Rock wasn't long for their world. He was heading off to Hollywood. And it's funny that it was with Hollywood Hogan, and they turned that night, and really the atmosphere was just like electric, electric. And the iconic moment is the two of them standing there looking at each other, looking at the crowd. And that's been done to death ever since. Never to the uh, same level, or this, I never had the same feel of how big that felt on that night. And if only for that, it's really one of the most iconic wrestling matches of all time. And if anyone tried to argue with me that that's one of the top 10 favorite wrestling matches, I would not argue. Yeah, is the work super smooth? Not really, but everything it's just perfect encapsulation of what pro wrestling can be on a given night. And really is one of the like truly great moments in the history of professional wrestling when you get two stars at their level. Um, I love that match so much. It's probably a match I'll watch today. People say Jay Briscoe made amends for what he said about the LGBTQ community. Yeah, yeah, Jay did a lot of work on that. He um, got involved with the LGBTQ community um, in like really earnest ways, and he got his forgiveness from the wrestling community, but he never got like mainstream forgiveness. He never got the run he should have got on with a TV wrestling company. Um, And that's a shame because, the reports are from members of the LGBTQ community within the wrestling industry that Jay really did like earnestly and genuinely make amends for what he had said. Um, and unfortunately, just probably Jay wasn't a big enough star to for that to be highlighted. Yet the crowd wasn't saying, yeah, that WrestleMania 18 crowd is one of the best crowds you'll ever see. Like it's a dream crowd. And but the beauty of that match is that The Rock and Hogan were at such a level that they knew not to fight the crowd. They leaned so perfectly into how the crowd was reacting and created just like this perfect moment in time. So much so that they turned Hogan instantly back into the black and the yellow and red, the red and yellow, leaned into Hulk Hogan. And at Backlash, he beats Triple H. Backlash is the next pay per view. He beats Triple H for the undisputed title. And you have to remember here that Triple H is coming off that major quad injury, and he came back as this mega hot babyface who had fizzled out totally by WrestleMania. He came back to Royal Rumble as a mega hot babyface, had fizzled out by WrestleMania, and he took the title off him a month later. That's so rare to give it to a 48-year-old Hulk Hogan, a 48-year-old who looks 68. Um, he loses the title later in the summer to the Undertaker, I think, wasn't it? But I actually really enjoyed his Edge tag team run as well. And I also really enjoyed his feud with Vince McMahon and the Street Fight at WrestleMania 19. And then he gets inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005, presented by none other than Sylvester Stallone, who really like Stallone plays a huge part in this because Stallone gave him that break in Rocky 3 as in the role of Thunderlips, which would then go on to give him that kind of mainstream appeal that he brought back to AWA and that he was able to parlay into being the Hulkster in WWE in '83. Um, and then we get the TNA run, and the TNA run is really funny because this is where we see the absolute politicking gone wrong of Hogan. It was like WCW, late WCW on steroids, pun intended. And he gets brought in, and one of the first images of him in TNA in 2006, 7, 6. I have this on my notes here somewhere. I saw shots. I think 2006. One of the first images we see of him in TNA is in a ring with Eric Bischoff, with Kevin Nash, and with Scott Hall. And like 2007 audiences just did not want to see another retread. And like this is where Eric Bischoff's whole career has gone wrong, is that none of these guys were able to let go of the past and create something new. It was always a retread. And like even like Hogan was hesitant to turn heel in '96, not seeing the writing on the wall that his character was dead and that the industry was changing and that he needed to turn heel. Because his '94 to '96 run as the Hulkamaniac, as Hulkamania in WCW was extremely hit and miss and had gone unbelievably stale. And realistically, it had probably been stale since about WrestleMania 7 at the very latest. Maybe even after WrestleMania 6. So we're talking like 5, 6 years where this character was getting more and more and more stale. He was hesitant to turn heel, and then the heel turn was huge. But he didn't learn the lesson from that. He thought the lesson was, I'm a big star, not that, and a heel turn or whatever, and be surrounding myself by these people is the star attraction. Not the star attraction was given something new and fresh. And the heel turn was this something new and fresh and industry breaking. And when he lands in TNA in '07, he doesn't, he goes back to that thing of what was worked for me before was heel run with these people instead of going, what's a new and fresh variation of what I can be as Hulk Hogan. And we never got that. And the TNA run, like it killed the company. It absolutely like killed the company. It was just such a disaster year after year. And TNA had built a really loyal, strong fan base in those kind of 04, 05, 06 years until Hogan and all the old cronies showed up and ran that shit into the ground. Um, and he has his last televised match. I think it was Bound for Glory 2010 with Sting. Actually, coincidentally, not a terrible match. Um, and it's nice that it was with Sting, someone he did tremendous pay-per-view business with back in '97. Probably within his top three, top five pay-per-view buy rates. Top three probably WrestleMania 18, that WrestleMania 19. Um, that's when pay-per-view buys were big for both companies. And he finishes his last ever televised match with Sting in 2010 at Bound for Glory. And he kind of sits out the next few years, more or less, of his contract until he's a free agent again in 2013, and then it's 2015 when the controversy starts to kick off. And I think what probably most perfectly encapsulates Hogan's legacy, the complicated legacy that we talk of, is his last ever appearance in WWE is in 2025 in January, getting booed by that audience while he tries to sell his beer. I don't think anything else really needs to be said. That the guy who made many of us wrestling fans. I would attribute my early fandom to Bret, but certainly Hulk Hogan played a huge part of that. The guy who made probably more wrestling fans than anybody else in the history of the business. His last ever appearance for the company that made him and he helped make was hawking his crappy real American beer while being booed in America. I think that sums it up perfectly. Um, as a beer fan and a wrestling fan, I sat at home that night eternally booing. I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions you may have. I'll keep this going for a couple of minutes if you want to stay. JT says Jay Briscoe versus Jay Lethal match for the title is one of the best matches. Incredible. What was that? His karma boo? Yeah, pure karma. It felt like it really like, and like because WWE is quite. It's very funny. WWE thinks they've really leaned into the Trump presidency and stuff, but I actually don't. I think the WWE fan base in general is quite a liberal minded fan base. I think particularly wrestling in this day and age has a huge amount of liberal fans. I'm sure there is still some conservative fans in that, but the great American hero trope doesn't work in 2025. And the person who tries it most at this stage is MJF, and he does it as a heel. I think that'll tell you what the general, not all, but the general wrestling fan is at this stage. That the character waving the American flag is a heel character. It couldn't be more different from I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. Also, like whatever your relationship with America is on a political level, that is an absolute banger of a team tune. Like I don't know if there's a team tune better in the history of professional wrestling either. So I suppose the last words and thoughts on Hulk Hogan is that he is, without doubt, in my opinion, one of the greatest professional wrestlers to ever do it. Um, Certainly one of the most important and most impactful wrestlers to ever do it. In terms of cultural impact, he's one that permeated the mainstream, particularly in America, like nobody else. Um, and you know, in terms of like cultural impact, he's up there with El Santo and Ricky Dozan, and the impacts they had on their countries. Probably not on the level of El Santo, uh, who is just like a cultural icon in Mexico. And Ricky Dozan was a cultural icon in Japan. I don't know if he still has that lasting legacy, but he died like 50 years ago. Um, and Hulk Hogan is the American version of that. Do we get any special appearances tomorrow on SmackDown for Hogan? I think the most we could probably expect is a video package. Um, Maybe some references. Does a wrestler wear the red and yellow? Will somebody do a big leg drop? All those things. I would imagine someone will do a leg drop. Someone will wear a red and yellow themed outfit at SummerSlam. Maybe it'll be Cody Rhodes. Uh, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Hogan has a complicated legacy amongst the wrestlers in the company. A funny thing I noticed today is that if you look at when R-Truth announced his retirement, now obviously we've been here for the last hour, I haven't been checking Twitter. When R-Truth announced his retirement, within an hour, within 30 minutes, there was an outpouring of respect from the WWE locker room. I didn't see a single tweet today yet from a WWE contracted wrestler mourning the passing of Hulk Hogan. So, with that in mind, I don't think it'll be a huge thing on SmackDown tomorrow night. It'll be mentioned, there might be a graphic, there might be a video package, but I don't think it'll be special appearances or any really a tribute show or anything like that. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Over the weekend, myself, Shane, Johnny the Beast Mortis, potentially a special guest, will be doing more of a comprehensive deep dive and conversation on the legacy of Hulk Hogan. And that'll be released probably on Sunday, maybe Monday. I'm really looking forward to that because Johnny Martin's knowledge of the subject is incredible, much more so than mine. I just wanted to give a quick overview on his career and his impact and his complicated legacy. So this we've recapped his career essentially today. And thanks for subscribing, JT. Really appreciate that. That means a lot to us. Our audience has been growing week on week. Really, really recently we've shot up in subscribers, and that's brilliant. And thanks for commenting as well, because commenting is what makes these live streams worthwhile, and it's the reason I do it. I could pre-record these and upload them afterwards, but it's that interaction. Sorry for the lagging at the start. I should have checked what I was connected to. But yeah, we'll see you guys again over the weekend when Wrestling Fan Wrestling Show 4-Man Boot drops the Hogan episode. Thank you and good night.